I heard them laugh before I even stepped into the room. My name echoed between their whispers, a name they used like a punchline. I was holding his hand, smiling, thinking that maybe this time I finally belonged. Then I saw it. The phone screens, the faces trying not to laugh, the whispered phrase that sliced through everything. She actually believed it. My heart stopped. The world slowed down. Every look, every secret message between them suddenly made sense. It wasn't love. It was a bet. I was the joke they all shared. He tried to speak, but I couldn't hear a single word. I just remember the taste of something metallic in my mouth, the taste of shame, of betrayal, of a heart shattering quietly in public. I ran before the tears showed, but they still followed me, like echoes that never fade. That night, I promised myself something. I wouldn't disappear. I would become the kind of woman whose name they wouldn't dare to laugh at again. And if you've ever been the punchline in someone else's story, this channel is for you. Subscribe and turn on the bell. Here we tell stories that deserve to be heard. I don't remember the first time someone called me the fat girl, but I do remember the first time I believed it. It was in the school cafeteria. I was 8. I had a lunchbox my mother packed with love, a sandwich, an apple, and a small slice of her homemade cake. The girls at the next table giggled, whispering behind their hands. One of them pointed at my cake and said, "Of course she eats dessert first." I laughed with them, pretending it didn't hurt. But that day I went home and threw the rest of the cake away. I told my mother I wasn't hungry, and she looked at me with confusion, not knowing that shame was already filling me up more than food ever could. After that, I began to eat in secret. Not because I loved food too much, but because I loved peace and silence and the feeling of not being watched. My bedroom became my restaurant, my confession booth, my punishment cell. I would wait until everyone slept, then open the fridge carefully, like a thief stealing comfort. Food wasn't the problem. It was the only thing that never laughed at me. When people tell you that fat kids have no discipline, they never talk about how much discipline it takes to swallow humiliation every day. My father used to say I had a good appetite, as if it were a flaw I should fix. My mother tried every diet she could find: smoothies, fasting, strange teas that smelled like wet grass. Every failure felt like proof that something was wrong with me, not with the rules. Teachers treated me differently too. In PE class, they'd say, "Don't worry, just do what you can." But that phrase wasn't kindness. It was a reminder that I was already expected to fail. When I ran, people stared. When I didn't run, they judged. So I learned to hide behind jokes. If I made fun of myself first, at least the laughter belonged to me. By the time I reached middle school, I had mastered invisibility. I wore oversized hoodies even in summer. I walked with my head down. I smiled too much to seem easygoing, harmless, likable. I wanted to be the kind of fat girl that people said was nice, because being nice was safer than being noticed. But inside, I was starving, not for food, but for belonging. Every comment, every laugh, every photo where I was cropped out became another bite I swallowed in silence. Then came him, the boy who would later become the reason for my first real heartbreak. But back then, he was just a classmate with kind eyes and messy hair. He offered me his pen one day in class, and I thought it meant something. When you grow up invisible, every small gesture feels like sunlight. We started talking after school. He told me I was funny. I told him he was different. I started dressing better, hoping maybe someone would notice the change. For a moment, I forgot what it felt like to hate my reflection. But my body never let me forget for long. Every mirror, every window, every reflection on a car door whispered the same thing. Too much. Too much flesh, too much space, too much of me. So I tried to eat less, tried to be less. My lunch became an apple. My dinner, a glass of water. My reward, a dizzy sense of control that vanished the moment someone brought cake to a birthday party. I'd go home that night and eat everything in sight. Bread, cereal, guilt. Then I'd cry quietly, pressing my stomach as if I could push it away. Food was never about hunger. It was about silence. It filled the emptiness that people left when they stared, when they laughed, when they didn't choose me for their team. It filled the space between me and the world. But the more I ate, the more space there was, and the less I fit anywhere. My life became a cycle of restriction and relief, punishment and forgiveness. I started every Monday with promises. This week I'll be good. By Friday, I was exhausted from pretending I wasn't broken. Sometimes I wonder how much of me they created. Not my body, but my shame. Shame sculpted me more than any diet ever did. It shaped my posture, my silence, my hunger for approval. It taught me to apologize before speaking, to laugh before they did, to disappear before they asked me to. And yet, even in that darkness, there was a small part of me that wanted to fight back. That part would wake up at night, standing in front of the mirror, whispering, "Maybe one day they'll see you differently." It was a quiet, fragile hope, the kind that hides behind sarcasm and smiles. But it was there, and it grew, like a seed planted in the dirt of humiliation. I didn't know it yet, but every cruel word was building the woman I would one day become. The one who would walk back into that same town, years later, not as their joke, but as their lesson. I guess that's the thing about pain. You don't see it while it's shaping you. You just survive it, one bite, one look, one insult at a time, until one day, you're no longer the same person. You're the storm that grew quietly in their silence. There's a point where sadness stops feeling like sadness and starts feeling like routine. I woke up every day knowing exactly how disappointment would taste. I'd look at myself in the mirror, trace the outline of my face with tired eyes, and wonder if this was all I was ever meant to be. A warning, a cautionary tale about what happens when a girl doesn't know her place. After the bet, I disappeared. My parents thought I was just studying harder, but I was studying how to vanish. I deleted my social media, avoided every place where they might see me, and drowned myself in noise, TV, music, anything that could keep my thoughts quiet. But silence always found a way back. It whispered the same sentence every night. You were never enough. I tried to rewrite it with food, with sleep, with pretending not to care, but it stayed. I remember sitting on my bedroom floor surrounded by empty snack wrappers, feeling the same kind of fullness you feel right before you break. I didn't even cry anymore. Tears would have meant I still cared. I didn't. Or at least that's what I told myself. Sometimes I'd imagine running into them again, the ones who laughed, the boy who made me believe, but even in my fantasies, I couldn't speak. My mouth opened, but no words came out. That's what humiliation does. It takes your voice and teaches you how to smile through the silence. I hated mirrors. I started covering them with scarves. I couldn't stand catching glimpses of the girl they made me believe I was. My mother noticed the change, but she didn't ask much. She just said, "You're quieter lately." I wanted to tell her that quiet was the only thing I had left. School became mechanical. Wake up, walk fast, avoid eye contact, survive. I learned to move like a shadow, always there, never seen. But even shadows have weight. The more I hid, the heavier I felt. My body wasn't just flesh anymore. It was memory, ridicule, fear. I carried it like a crime I didn't commit but had to atone for. Nights were the hardest. I'd lie in bed with the lights off, scrolling through old photos, comparing myself to girls I once called friends. They all looked happy. They all looked light. I wondered how it felt to walk into a room without checking if you were the biggest person there. I started cutting out meals again, thinking maybe hunger could erase me faster. Hunger has a way of quieting everything, the noise, the pain, even hope. But it also lies. It tells you you're in control while it eats away the little pieces of you that still care. One night I fainted in the shower. When I opened my eyes, my mother was crying, begging me to eat. I did, not because I wanted to live, but because dying felt like letting them win. Still, I wasn't living either. I was existing between shame and survival, breathing just enough to keep the illusion going. I wore long sleeves to hide the bruises from bumping into things I never noticed. My body felt foreign, heavy, almost like it belonged to someone else. I stopped looking at people. Eye contact felt dangerous. Every glance reminded me that I was readable, mockable, visible in all the wrong ways. I started walking at night when no one could see me. The streets were empty, quiet, safe. That's when I found the small gym 2 blocks from home. The lights were off, but there was a poster in the window. A smiling woman in workout clothes, strong, confident, the kind of person I never thought I could be. I stared at that poster for a long time. Not because I wanted to be her, but because I wanted to know how it felt to look like she did. Not her body, but her peace. That was the first spark, though I didn't recognize it then. I started walking past the gym every night, pretending it didn't matter. But I'd always stop, always look. One night, I whispered to my reflection in the glass, "Maybe one day." That whisper was the first truth I had spoken in months. After that, something inside me shifted. Not hope, not yet, but the faint memory of wanting something more than pity. It hurt, like stretching a muscle that had been asleep too long. The next morning, I looked in the mirror again. Same face, same scars, same body. But this time, I didn't cover it. I just looked. I saw someone who had survived humiliation, cruelty, starvation, and still woke up. Someone who was still here. I didn't love her, not yet, but I didn't want her to disappear anymore. That day, I made a decision without realizing it, to keep breathing, to stay, to exist, even if it hurt. Because maybe, just maybe, pain was no longer the enemy. Maybe it was the beginning. It didn't happen all at once. Change never does. It starts quietly, like a whisper that refuses to die. For weeks, I kept passing by that small gym on my nightly walks. The lights were always dim, the smell of sweat and determination leaking through the half-open door. I never went inside. I didn't belong there. At least that's what I told myself. But one evening it started to rain, and I had nowhere else to go. So I stepped in, drenched, shivering, clutching my old hoodie around me like armor. The trainer looked up, surprised. He asked if I needed help. I said I just wanted to wait for the rain to stop. He nodded, handed me a towel, and went back to training someone. For the first time in years, no one stared. No one whispered. I sat there, watching bodies move, heavy ones, thin ones, confident, awkward. Everyone was struggling with something. For the first time, I realized I wasn't the only one fighting invisible wars. When the rain stopped, I left, but I carried something with me. Not courage, not yet, but the thought that maybe I could come back, and I did. The next week, and the one after that. At first, I didn't touch any equipment. I just walked, watched, breathed. Then one day, I stood in front of the mirror and picked up a single dumbbell. It was small, but it felt like holding my entire past in one hand. My arm trembled, my reflection wavered, but I didn't put it down. Every second hurt, every breath screamed. But for the first time, the pain belonged to me. It wasn't humiliation, It was proof that I was still alive. That night, I told my mother I wanted to move, to start over somewhere new. She didn't ask why, she just nodded, like she'd been waiting for me to say it. We sold what we could and moved to a quieter town. No familiar faces, no whispers, no history, just space. I enrolled in community college, working part-time at a bakery. Irony, I know, the fat girl working with sugar. But this time, food didn't control me. It became a language I could rewrite. I learned to bake not for comfort, but for creation. Measuring, mixing, decorating. It was the first time my hands made something beautiful instead of destructive. People loved my cakes. They'd say things like, "You have talent," and "You have patience." No one said, "For a big girl." They just said I was good, and maybe that's when I started believing I could be. But healing is never linear. Some days I still hated mirrors. Some nights I ate without hunger. I was rebuilding a life out of broken glass, cutting myself with memories I hadn't yet forgiven. Still, every morning, I showed up at the gym. I wasn't fast, I wasn't strong, but I was there. I learned the names of the muscles I once cursed. I learned how to breathe through effort, how to stay when it hurt. And slowly, the weight on my body started to feel lighter than the one on my mind. One day, my trainer, the same man who had handed me that towel months before, said something simple. "You're getting stronger." I laughed, assuming he meant physically. But then he added, "Not here," pointing at my arms, "here," tapping his chest. And that's when I realized what was really changing. My reflection was no longer my enemy. It was my witness. I decided I would study nutrition, not to lose weight, but to understand. I wanted to know why food had been both my comfort and my prison. I wanted to learn what no one had ever taught me, that healing doesn't come from punishment. So I applied for scholarships, studied at night, worked during the day. The bakery became my classroom, the gym, my sanctuary. My world was still small, but for the first time, it was mine. Years passed like seasons, quietly, persistently. I didn't become thin overnight. In fact, I stopped chasing thinness altogether. I wanted health, strength, freedom. My body changed, yes, but it was my mind that transformed first. I began to walk differently, not hiding, not apologizing. People noticed. They'd say I glowed. They didn't know that glow was the light of someone who had finally stopped running from herself. And then came the letter, a reunion invitation, my old high school, 10 years since graduation. The thought made my chest tighten. Faces I hadn't seen since that night, names that still echoed in the back of my mind. For a moment, I thought of throwing it away. But then I remembered the promise I'd made to myself the night they laughed. I wouldn't disappear. I would become the kind of woman whose name they wouldn't dare to laugh at again. I looked in the mirror, really looked, and for the first time, I smiled without hesitation. Not out of pride, but recognition. That girl who once ran away from that party had grown into someone even her past couldn't humiliate. So I circled the date on the calendar, not as revenge, as closure. Because I was no longer the joke. I was the ending they never expected. When I started studying nutrition, I realized how much of what I had believed about my body wasn't science. It was shame dressed up as advice. Every chapter I read felt like unlearning a lie. Calories, metabolism, hunger, fullness, they were no longer enemies, but languages I had never been taught to speak. I spent long nights reading with my old gym towel beside me, like a relic from another life. During classes, I took notes furiously, connecting every concept to a version of me that once cried in front of a mirror. I wasn't just learning about the body, I was learning about mine. But the more I learned, the angrier I became. Angry at how the world had convinced me to hate myself in the name of health. angry that no one had ever told me that food wasn't a sin, that rest wasn't failure, that hunger wasn't a weakness. One evening after class, I stayed behind to talk to my professor, a woman in her 40s, tall, confident, with kind eyes that saw straight through pretenses. I asked her, "Do you think someone like me could ever work in this field?" She smiled, tilted her head, and said, "You mean someone human? I hope so." That sentence changed something in me. It was the first time I realized that my story didn't disqualify me. It gave me purpose. I graduated with honors. My mother cried at the ceremony, and for the first time, her tears weren't from worry. They were from pride. I took a job at a clinic, small but busy. Most of my patients were women who looked like I once did. Tired, scared, apologizing for their weight before even sitting down. Every time they said, "I've tried everything," I saw my younger self in their eyes. So I started teaching them what I wished someone had told me years ago, that they weren't broken, that their worth wasn't tied to a number, that healing begins when you stop punishing yourself for existing. The clinic grew busier. Word spread that there was a nutritionist who didn't judge, who listened, who understood. They came from other cities bringing stories of humiliation, of diets that broke their spirit, of doctors who told them to just try harder. I listened, and with every story, I healed a little more myself. But it wasn't enough. I wanted to create something bigger, something that didn't exist when I needed it most. So I started saving money. Every coin, every tip from clients who insisted on paying extra because you helped me more than you know. I rented a small space downtown, nothing fancy, just 4 walls and a dream. The day I got the keys, I stood there alone, holding the metal in my hand like proof that the bet they made years ago no longer defined me. I called it the balance room. It wasn't a gym. It wasn't a clinic. It was both and neither. A space where people could move, learn, and breathe without shame. No mirrors. No scales, just presence. I painted the walls soft gray, filled the shelves with plants, hung quotes that weren't about motivation but compassion. The first day I opened, only 3 people came, but I treated them like the world. We talked, moved, stretched, cried. They left lighter, not because of calories, but because of release. By the 2nd month, I had 20 clients. By the 3rd, a waiting list. Still, success didn't silence the ghosts. Some nights I'd lock up and sit alone, staring at the empty mats, remembering the laughter from that party years ago. I'd wonder if they ever thought about me. But then I'd hear footsteps outside, someone thanking me for what I'd built, and I'd remember I didn't need their regret. I had built something they could never take credit for. My pain had become architecture. One afternoon, I got an email from a magazine that focused on women entrepreneurs. They wanted to feature my story. I almost deleted it. I didn't think I was ready to be seen like that. But then I remembered the girl who once covered mirrors with scarves. She deserved to be seen. The day the article came out, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Messages, congratulations, invitations. The headline read, "The nutritionist who teaches women to heal, not starve." I looked at my reflection in the phone screen. Strong shoulders, soft eyes, a body still full, still mine, and whispered, "We did it." My business kept growing. I hired 2 other women who had their own stories of struggle. We became a small family of healers, not perfect, but real. Clients began sharing their transformations online. They didn't post before and after pictures. They posted moments, laughing, dancing, cooking without guilt. It was contagious. I started giving workshops at schools, teaching teenagers about body image, about self-worth, about kindness. Sometimes after class, a girl would come up to me with tears in her eyes and whisper, "Thank you. I thought I was the only one." and I'd smile because I knew that feeling too well. Building this space wasn't just about helping others, it was about building a version of me that could finally stand tall without apology. I didn't erase my past. I turned it into foundation. Every cruel word, every laugh, every moment of shame was now part of the walls around me. And when people walked in and said, "It feels peaceful here," I knew why. The peace wasn't from the colors or the candles. It was from survival turned into purpose. It started with messages. At first, just a few. Women from other towns who had read the article or seen a post about the balance room. They wrote things like, "Your story gave me hope," or, "I thought I was the only one who hated mirrors." I tried to answer every message, staying up late with my laptop glowing in the dark, tears blurring the screen. Every sentence they sent felt like an echo of my own pain, bouncing back to me, softened by understanding. Soon the messages turned into letters, long confessions written by strangers who trusted me with their shame. A mother who couldn't play with her kids because she was too embarrassed to go to the park. A teenager who stopped eating lunch at school because of what people said about her arms. A nurse who spent all day caring for others but couldn't bear to care for herself. I kept them all, printed and folded in a box under my desk. They weren't fan mail. They were proof of connection, proof that pain, when shared, becomes lighter. One evening, after closing, I found a young girl waiting outside the studio. She looked maybe 16, shoulders tense, hoodie oversized, just like mine used to be. She asked if I was the woman from the article. When I said yes, she burst into tears. She told me she'd been skipping school, too afraid to face the people who made fun of her weight. She said her mother brought her there because she didn't know what else to do. I invited them in. We sat on the floor and talked for hours. I didn't give her a diet. I gave her a story, mine. When she left, she hugged me and whispered, "I didn't think people like us could win." That night, I couldn't sleep. Her words kept replaying in my mind. People like us, the invisible ones, the punchlines, the ones who learned to shrink to survive. Maybe I hadn't just built a business. Maybe I'd built a refuge. The next month, we hosted our first workshop called Bodies That Breathe. I expected 10 people. 50 showed up. We had to open the windows and borrow chairs from the cafe next door. The energy was electric. People laughed, cried, shared stories. It felt like church for souls that had been exiled from their own skin. I watched as strangers hugged, comforted each other, and realized I wasn't the only one healing. Healing had become contagious. At the end of the night, someone asked me, "How did you forgive them?" For a moment, I didn't know who she meant, my bullies or myself. I smiled and said, "I stopped waiting for an apology." The room went quiet. Then someone started clapping. It spread like a wave until everyone was on their feet. I stood there, overwhelmed, realizing that the girl who once hid behind jokes was now leading a room full of people who saw her as strength. Not long after, a local TV station contacted me. They wanted to do a small segment about the balance room. I almost said no. The idea of being on camera terrified me, but then I thought of that girl in the hoodie. If she could be brave enough to walk into my studio, I could be brave enough to speak. The day of the interview, I wore a simple black dress, no fancy makeup, no illusions. I wanted to look like myself. The reporter asked what made my program different. I said, "We don't fix bodies, we free them." The segment aired that night. The next morning, my inbox was overflowing, not with clients, but with gratitude. People said they felt seen for the first time. Some said they cried watching it. For days, strangers stopped me on the street to say thank you. Some hugged me without even asking. It was strange, being recognized for something I once hid from the world. But it wasn't fame. It was connection, multiplied. Soon, schools began inviting me to speak to students. The first time I walked into a gymnasium full of teenagers, my legs shook. The last time I was in a place like that, I was the joke. But now, the microphone was in my hand. I told them about that night, about the bet, about running away. You could have heard a pin drop. When I finished, a boy in the back raised his hand and said, "I'm sorry if I ever made someone feel that way." The whole room went silent again, and then something broke. Applause, tears, laughter. Teachers hugged me afterward, saying they'd never seen their students so quiet, so attentive. The echo grew louder. My story traveled through whispers, articles, classrooms, hearts. Women began bringing their daughters. Men came too, some shy, some desperate, some broken in ways they couldn't name. They came for help with food, but they stayed for something deeper, for forgiveness, for belonging. I realized then that this was never just about me. My healing had become a mirror for others to see themselves differently. But even as the echo grew, I kept one promise to myself. I would never forget where I came from. Every success, every applause, every tear shed by a stranger was rooted in that single night of humiliation. The night they laughed became the night I began. One afternoon, I stood in the studio doorway watching my clients leave, their faces calm, their bodies moving without fear. The sun hit the window just right, and for a moment, I saw my reflection layered over theirs. I smiled. The girl who once ran from the world was now standing still, surrounded by people who had learned to stay. The echo of their laughter, the cruel one, was gone, replaced by new echoes, softer ones, kinder ones, voices that said, "Me too," voices that said, "I'm healing," voices that said, "Thank you." The reunion day arrived like a shadow I had been walking toward for years. I had imagined it 1,000 times. The slow-motion entrance, the stunned faces, the whispered apologies that would come too late. I thought it would feel like justice, but when the day actually came, I felt nothing. No fire, no rage, just stillness. I woke up early, made coffee, sat by the window, and watched the city wake up. The same city that once laughed at me now hummed below like a different world. My reflection in the glass looked calm, older, whole. The girl who once ran from that gymnasium was gone. All that remained was me, the woman who built a life out of her ashes. Still, I went. Not for them, but for her. The younger me who deserved to see how far we had come. The event was held at a fancy hotel downtown with glittering lights and music that sounded like nostalgia. When I walked in, conversations paused. Heads turned. I could feel their eyes scanning me, trying to recognize the ghost of the girl they once mocked. Some did. Some didn't. I smiled anyway. Not the kind of smile that hides pain, but the kind that comes from knowing you don't need anyone's permission to exist. A few people approached me. Compliments, small talk, questions about what I'd been doing. None of them mentioned the bet. Of course they didn't. People rewrite history when it makes them look better. Then I saw him. The boy who started it all. Older now, broader shoulders, thinner hair, but the same uncertain smile. For a moment, I felt my chest tighten, not from love or hate, but from memory. He walked toward me, drink in hand, pretending this was a coincidence. "Wow," he said, his voice almost hesitant. "You look amazing." I wanted to laugh. It was the kind of comment people make when they're trying to erase guilt with flattery. But I didn't laugh. I didn't cry either. I just said, "I know." He blinked, as if the words didn't fit the girl he remembered. And then he said, "Listen, about that night." I stopped him. "Don't," I said gently. "You don't owe me an apology. You owe it to the girl you were back then, and she's your problem, not mine." I smiled, turned, and walked away. No dramatic exit, no music swelling, just peace. I thought I'd feel triumphant, but I didn't, because real closure doesn't scream, it sighs. It's quiet, almost boring. It's the realization that you don't need revenge when you've already rebuilt everything they tried to destroy. I stood near the balcony, looking down at the city lights, thinking how different everything looked from above. That's what growth does. It changes your perspective, not your past. Later that night, as I left, one of the girls from that old group came up to me. She looked nervous. "I just wanted to say," she stammered, "you always were nice to everyone. I'm sorry if we..." She didn't finish. I didn't make her. I just nodded and said, "We were kids. I forgive you." Her eyes filled with tears, and for the first time, I saw her not as my tormentor, but as another broken person who had learned cruelty before she learned empathy. It didn't excuse what she did, but it explained it. Forgiveness didn't make me weak. It made me free. When I got home, I took off my shoes, lit a candle, and sat on the floor of my quiet apartment. My phone buzzed with messages. Friends from the reunion, people saying it was great to see me, some even asking for appointments at the balance room. I smiled at the irony. The people who once made me feel unworthy now wanted my help to feel whole. But I didn't respond right away. I just sat there, letting the silence fill me. It wasn't empty anymore. It was sacred. That night, I opened the box under my desk, the one filled with letters from women who had written to me over the years. I read a few, the nurse, the teenager, the mother. Their words reminded me why I had done all of this, not to prove them wrong, not to make anyone pay, but to give meaning to the pain that once almost killed me. The scene I had always imagined, the moment of public redemption, of poetic justice, it never came. Because I didn't need it anymore. I didn't need them to see what I'd become. I just needed to keep becoming. It's strange, isn't it? How we spend years preparing for confrontations that never happen, only to realize the real confrontation is with ourselves. I looked at my reflection again. Same dark hair, same soft curves, same eyes that once begged to be smaller, and whispered, "We made it." Not perfectly, not painlessly, but truthfully. I didn't post pictures from the reunion. I didn't tell anyone about what he said or how it ended. Some victories are too sacred to turn into content. They live quietly inside you, proof that healing doesn't need witnesses. The world that once laughed had forgotten that night. But I hadn't, and I didn't need to. It wasn't a wound anymore. It was a scar, soft and faint, proof of survival. Sometimes people ask me if I'd change anything, if I could go back and stop them from making that bet. I always say no. Because without that night, I might still be waiting for permission to be myself. Without that betrayal, I wouldn't have built a life anchored in truth. Pain gave me direction. Cruelty gave me clarity. And the bet that once broke me became the reason I finally chose myself. Sometimes I still wake up before dawn, before the city remembers to breathe. I make coffee, open the windows, and let the air touch my skin. The same skin I once tried so hard to hide. It's softer now, not because it changed, but because I finally stopped fighting it. I used to think my body was the enemy, that it betrayed me, embarrassed me, trapped me. But it was never my body that failed me. It was the world that convinced me to be at war with it. Every scar, every stretch mark, every soft curve I used to despise has carried me here, through storms that could have killed me. This body didn't ruin my life. It saved it. It kept showing up even when my mind wanted to disappear. It walked into rooms full of laughter, into gyms where I didn't belong, into a life I thought I'd never deserve. It held me together when shame tried to tear me apart. I owe it more than forgiveness. I owe it gratitude. Now, when I see my reflection, I don't flinch. I study it. I honor it. I think of that girl in the cafeteria, the one who threw away her cake to earn their approval. I wish I could tell her that sweetness was never her sin. It was her survival. That she would one day feed the world with the same hands that once trembled with guilt. I wish I could tell her that they were wrong. All of them. Every person who laughed, every boy who made a bet, every voice that told her she was too much or not enough. Because what they mocked became my masterpiece. I still have moments of doubt. Healing isn't a straight line, it's a spiral. There are days when I catch my reflection and hear old echoes whispering, "You'll never belong." But then I smile, because belonging was never the goal. Freedom was. And freedom looks like this: messy, soft, unapologetic. It looks like sitting here, drinking coffee at sunrise, without needing to prove anything to anyone. The balance room has grown beyond what I ever imagined. We now have 3 branches, each one run by women who were once clients. Sometimes I walk in quietly, just to watch them work. I see laughter where there used to be fear, joy where there used to be judgment. People move freely, unafraid of mirrors, unafraid of themselves. And I think this is what healing looks like when it multiplies. It becomes community. Every person who walks through those doors brings a piece of their story, and together we build something that feels like peace. Last month, a documentary team asked to film a day in my life. They said they wanted to show an inspiring story of transformation. I agreed, but only if they promised to include everything: the silence, the scars, the ordinary moments between victories. When they asked for the final shot, I knew exactly where to take them. We went back to my old school. The gymnasium was smaller than I remembered, the walls faded, the air thick with dust and ghosts. I stood there for a while, alone, listening. No laughter, no whispers, just quiet. The reporter asked, "What does it feel like to be back?" I smiled and said, "Like forgiveness." That's when I realized the story had never been about revenge. It was about return. As the sun began to set through the broken windows, I felt a strange peace wash over me. I didn't need an apology. I didn't need them to remember. The universe had already balanced the scales. The girl they laughed at became the woman who built a sanctuary. The bet they made became the foundation of my empire. I walked out of that gym and didn't look back. Outside, the city buzzed with life. I passed a bakery window, saw a young girl inside decorating a cake. She was laughing, carefree, her face lit by the glow of sugar and hope. She didn't see me, but I saw her, and for a moment, I saw myself in her smile. I whispered, "Keep going," and kept walking. Later that night, I came home, turned off the lights, and stood in front of the mirror. The reflection staring back wasn't flawless, but it was real. My body isn't a tragedy or a miracle. It's a home. And after all these years, I finally moved back in. I think about the people who once made me small. I don't hate them. I don't thank them either. They were just the beginning of my story, not the ending. The ending belongs to me. It belongs to this body that refused to vanish. It belongs to every woman who still hides behind oversized hoodies, every girl who still eats in silence, every soul who still thinks they have to shrink to be loved. I built this life for us. And if you're watching this, maybe you've been where I was. Maybe you've carried the same silence, the same shame, the same hunger for something more. So listen closely. You are not broken. You are becoming. You are the proof that beauty isn't what they told you. It's survival. It's softness. It's staying. If this story touched you, even for a second, write in the comments where you're watching from. Let's see how far these stories can travel. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the bell. because here we tell stories that deserve to be heard.